What's up, everybody? We are back with another set review video. This time, it's Avatar. We kind of haven't done this in a little bit, and the fact that we're coming back to like a secret lair set with it is a little interesting, but hey, it is what it is. And you know what? Avatar is a beloved IP. Honestly, this set seems kind of sick in comparison to the Spider Man one that just came out. And honestly, it's probably a lot better than the Final Fantasy one. It's probably one of the best secret layers that we were secret layers. One of the best sets that we've had that's universes beyond in a hot minute. So I'm a little optimistic about this set and what it's going to do in really the competitive state of Magic the Gathering. But like always, don't forget like and subscribe to the channel. Obviously, give us all the support that you can. Help us achieve the Avatar state. All right? But let's go ahead and just talk a little bit about what some of our methodology is here. So, just like we've done with all the previous set reviews, we're going to be looking at this, but mostly as it applies to whatever the next competitive season's going to be. When we last did this, it was for Final Fantasy, and we were looking almost exclusively at Standard because it was competitive Standard for the next two seasons. Now, it's just mostly Standard because it's the next RC cycle, and the RCQ cycle starts in just a couple of weeks. So, obviously, the week after Avatar releases, everybody's going to want their hands on this set. That way, they can be at the first set of RCQs and securing their wins real early. But we've also got the Avatar Spotlight series in the United States in Atlanta in January. So, Standard's going to be the focus. But we'll talk a little bit about Pioneer and Modern, mostly because Lorwyn's PT is coming up next year, and Modern players might be a little interested in what this set has to offer for them. But it's going to be super limited. But the big thing that we have to talk about are the bans. All right, Wizards of the Coast just announced earlier today that there are a couple of key bans in Standard and Pioneer, and Legacy gets its bans, but no one's spending the money on that format. Mostly me. I'm the people not spending money on the format because I'm poor. But three cards got banned out of Standard today: Proph's Eidetic Memory, Screaming Nemesis, and finally, Vivi Ornitier. Now, I threw Heartfire Hero up here because Heartfire Hero is so powerful, so busted, that it got banned out of Standard and now out of Pioneer. Who would have thought that Double Jeopardy wouldn't apply to Magic the Gathering cards? But here we are. It's unfortunate. Mono Red's dead, but thank God Vivi's dead too. So, can't complain with results. Thanks, Wizards. A little late, but better late than never, I suppose. All right. Now, why do these bans matter? First and foremost, all the black decks in Standard have gotten way better. All right, with Mono Red, which was really kind of the black deck's easiest target out of the way, they can at least thrive a little bit in the first couple of weeks of a unknown format. With Vivi out of the way, that was the biggest competitor to this deck. So yay, and blue white control. All right, who cares? Black decks are going to be fairly dominant, at least for the next week or two in Standard. With Mono Red being dead in Pioneer and in Standard, it's going to take a lot for a red deck win strategy, a Sly Red, to really take off. And there's definitely some potential there, but maybe not as much as we once thought. Phoenix and Pioneer kind of takes a hit from all of this, but it's also Pioneer Phoenix. They'll get into a flow state and just start cycling through a bunch of cards super easy, so eh. But weirdly enough, Modern's considered healthy now, and Legacy's kind of in a good place. These are things that I haven't heard from players in a minute, but after the bans, with it being time for Entomb and Nadu to go, maybe everything's good. Who would have guessed? All right, but we're going to talk about the elephant in the room, the de facto tier 0 deck of standard, and that is Dimir Midrange. Now, it's likely the deck hasn't gotten too many new cards out of the Avatar set, and I would honestly argue the Rise of Sozin and my Scornful Striker are probably not the best inclusions in the deck. The Rise of Sozin's a really good Wrath, but you're a fairly creature heavy, like mid range, almost tempo deck. So destroying your own creatures, paying 6 mana to do so, doesn't feel super good. Being able to Cabal Ritual your opponent and just take a really good card out of their hand, or Cabal Therapy, it's one of the legacy cards. Again, I don't play the format. Like, that's going to be good, but the backside having firebending and everything is nice. It's a nice 5/5 beater, but I don't know if it's that great in the deck. My Scornful Striker does seem a lot better, especially in the more tempo-y, like creature dense variants. Being able to punish a spell whenever they play a non-creature spell is huge. Now, Vivi being gone makes my a little less impactful, but I do think that we're going to see some Spellslinger decks that stick around. And it might not be a main board card for Dimir by any means, but it definitely can have an impact on the format. I wouldn't be surprised to see Mai showing up, and I think there's probably space somewhere for a black control deck to run the Rise of Sozin. And again, why not do both in Dimir? It can do both, so why not try it? Just throw it in the shell and see if it works. Alright, in classic Arrested Development fashion, outside of Dimir, we're going to blow ourselves here, or blew ourselves. Hoops. Alright, so mono blue cards out of this set actually seem really good. Not only in standard, but I'd honestly argue with cards like Wan Shi Tong, the Librarian, the Keeper of Knowledge, the one who knows 10,000 things, that card might actually be cracked in older formats like Modern and Legacy. But realistically, we're here to talk about Standard. Boomerang Basics is essentially just copies 5 through 8 of the bounce effect that's been in Standard for a minute. Alright, the effect from Bloomburrow, which I don't play that much blue in Standard, but the fact that I've been hit by the cards so much is already kind of an issue. Boomerang Basics gives you a version that lets you return a non-land permanent to its owner's hand. So cool. Into the Flood mod does the same thing. Why does that matter? Boomerang Basics says that if you control the permanent, you draw a card. It's card advantage and it's bounce. You can't do it at instant speed, but there's a lot of good, valuable blue permanents that you can bounce back to your hand. You've got the bounce enchantment creature from the Duskmourn set, and as we're going to find out later, there's a lot of good bounce synergies here. Boomerang Basics is going to bring it right back to you and give you some advantage. That's the type of stuff that a bounce deck wants. We're going to talk about it a little bit later as well, but there's also a prowess deck that I think is sneakily hiding in the fringes. Octopus Form, and to a lesser extent Tai Li Chi Blocker, seem like really good inclusions in the prowess shell. Tai Li taps a creature and basically ensures that it's not getting back up again, and it has prowess, and it's a flash threat. Basically being able to tap down your opponent's blocker that they leave up for, let's say, a Slick Shot show off is already going to be good, but then giving Tai Li prowess and just ensuring, hey, if I couldn't kill you with the Slick Shot in the air, I've got Tai Li on the ground, it's pretty solid. Getting an extra effect where we can turn a creature into a worthless 1/1 or an O2, like Unable to Scream does, is nice. Honest work is, as it says, honest work. Tap a creature, remove all counters from it. So, sick. We basically get to make it useless for a turn. If it had a ton of counters on it, which can be really relevant in Eternal formats, that's awesome. And then it's just, okay, now it's a colorless mana dork. Pretty good. I could see maybe some decks running a copy of this in Modern to hopefully deal with stuff like Kappa Cannoneer, but paying 5 to do that definitely seems a little outlandish. But it has its benefits. Other places where I think we're going to see a lot of huge things in Standard: Accumulate Wisdom, and weirdly enough, Waterbender Ascension. Now, I've seen it show up in a couple of places, and I remember when Autumn Burchett did extremely well with the deck. But I think it's time for Mono Blue Tempo to come back. Waterbender Ascension guarantees that your creatures can come through unblocked, which is huge. And when we got Eddie Merc Crab and Tolarian Terror that are back in Standard, gaining some advantage whenever they deal combat damage to an opponent is going to be nice. We got a couple good flash flying threats like Wan Shi Tong and others, so that's not too terrible. But combine this with cards like Accumulate Wisdom. Look at the top 3, put one into our hand, and then if we play enough lessons, we can basically guarantee that we're hitting 3 cards off the top of our deck each time we cast this card. Is huge. We're going back to Arcavios. We're going back to Strixhaven. We're going to get lessons. We're going to get spells with the learn mechanic. Accumulate Wisdom and Octopus Form and Boomerang Basics all being lessons really does give me hope that a mono blue learn deck is going to be viable in Standard. And we can show our opponents what it means to learn the lesson that your spells aren't resolving, that your spells aren't coming off the stack, and that we're going to attack. So, Blue's got a lot of depth here. For the first time in a minute, it seems like Blue has some serious motion in the Standard format. But the other question we got to ask ourselves, especially after the ban, is it still good? And the answer is kind of middling. So obviously, we're not doing the Agatha's Soul Cauldron thing anymore. But just like we were looking at a moment ago, I think there is a blue prowess deck that can exist. And I think that blue base prowess deck is going to be a deck that is running Drakehatcher. Now, for those of you that don't remember this from one of the earlier RCs this year, where Izzet was being a menace alongside Corey Steelcutter, Drakehatcher was a preeminent threat then. Drakehatcher, Vigilance, Prowess, when this creature deals damage, put that many incubation counters on it, and remove 3 counters, and you make a 2/2 blue Drake creature token with flying, is really nice. But you pair that on too with something like Firebending Student that says prowess and it firebends X, where X is this creature's power, combined with just low to the ground blue and red spells like Abandon Attachments, another blue base spell, and we're already starting to see this deck coming together. Now, Abandon Attachments is interesting because you discard a card, and if you do, draw 2. Okay, it's a weird rummage divination effect, fine. Having it be in hybrid mana, interesting. Have it be a common, really interesting. Have it be instant speed so that you can use the firebending mana off of firebending student, and everything starts to come together in a super meaningful way. Now, is it gonna be good? It's questionable, which is why we've got Sokka down here. Sokka's technically Jeskai, but if we just close our eyes a little bit, it's basically just an Izzet card. An Izzet card that whenever we cast non-creature spells makes an ally token, and that our allies have prowess and menace. And by God, we've basically just recreated either Jeskai Ascendancy combo or worse, the Corey Steelcutter thing, with obviously a legend at the helm of the deck. Jeskai isn't as good as Izzet, but the mana in standard supports it, and when we can do blue and red super easy, splashing for white isn't that big a deal. So, is it still good? Maybe. But what's even better is that Control now has win conditions. It's a crazy thing. The win conditions for the existing blue-white control deck are, okay, let me wait until my opponent gets bored, and yay, my Overlord finally comes off suspend so I can stop beating you in the face with 2/1 flyers. Now, we have win cons that are actually worth something. We've got Aang Swift Survivor, which is basically doing the best spirit impression in standard. Now, the spirit that I'm thinking of is a little spirit from Pioneers Past, from Standards Past, that said when it enters the battlefield, you exile target spell with mana value 4 or less. Aang says flash, flying, airbend up to one target creature or spell, which means you exile it, and while it's exiled, its owner may cast it for 2 rather than its mana cost. Wait till your opponent taps out for something crazy. This doesn't counter it, it exiles it. It airbends it. It just stops it from existing on the stack. A 2/3 flying creature isn't that great, but it flips. Waterbend 8, which means you can either tap artifacts or tap creatures or just pay mana. 8, and it flips into Aang and La, Ocean's Fury. And whenever Aang and La attack, put a 1/1 counter on each tapped creature you control. Guess what? You swing, and oh no, my little 2/1 flying insects are now 3/2s. That's terrifying. And it's making everything bigger, and it's got reach and trample. Perfect. And thankfully, since we're not operating by old legend rules, Aang and La can be out, and then you can just play another Aang and ensure that your opponent isn't getting rid of this. But in addition to that, we've got United Front. Create X 1/1 ally creature tokens and then put a 1/1 counter on each of the creatures that you control. Alright, there have been instant speed versions of this that have existed in the past that weren't as good. But with Control now having a legendary threat that can get rid of spells on the stack, having United Front and multiple copies of it can prove to be super useful. And then, if everything else fails, you've got a Wrath. Avatar's Wrath says that you airbend all other creatures except for one of your choosing. And until your next turn, your opponents can't cast spells from anywhere other than their hands. So your opponent goes empty-handed? Cool. All of their creatures are airbended away. Except for maybe your Aang. Maybe your Aang and La. There's a lot of good options that you have. And Control definitely has the tools to get there. But One of the other things that's definitely happening to Standard, to Pioneer with the bands is it's going to become a multicolor slop format. Some of my teammates on Team Primetime are really high on playing 4 and 5 color bring to light and enigmatic shenanigans. And by God, if this set has not given the tools to just do everything in every color. Boomy Unleashed, Aang at the Crossroads, great cards. Aang at the Crossroads was basically Bant Gyruda. You throw a bunch of clones in your deck, and this thing goes crazy. And just so happens that if a creature you control leaves the battlefield at any point, you just transform Aang at the beginning of your next upkeep. And yeah, this Aang isn't that much more powerful, but it lets your earthbended lands now have vigilance. So let's say that you earthbend something with Boomy. Let's say you earthbend something with Toph. They're now just going to be really good lands that can still tap for mana, and at the beginning of combat you get to earthbend another two. That's solid. Boomy over here's a 5 mana 5/4 with trample when he enters earthbend 4, but when he deals combat damage, you untap all the lands that you control. Alright? Tap out to play Boomy, cool, whatever. Next turn, swing with him. If he deals any damage, your earthbended land now gets to attack twice. Alright, only land creatures can attack during that extra combat, but there's lots of ways that you can abuse this. Turn all of your creatures into forests, and that's solid. You play cards like Sylvan Awakening to turn all of your lands into 2/2 creatures, and that's solid. And remember, Earthbending just puts counters on them. If they're already creatures, you can put more counters on them if you want. And that's sick. Dragonfly Swarm, we've seen a lot of different iterations of this effect. This type of creature, the X3 flyer, but now it has ward. This one's power is based off of the non-creature, non-land cards in your graveyard, and if it dies, if there's a lesson, you draw a card, it replaces itself. It's almost like Crackling Drake, but like a little bit better, a little easier to cast, a little easier to kill. But I think it's still a really good finisher in a blue-red deck, or again, just the multicolor slop that we're about to see. There's already a 4-color Teachings deck in Standard. You've already got Niv to Light and Enigmatic in Pioneer. We're not going to get back to the point where we see anything crazy like Money Pile in Modern, but a couple of these could be cool there. Arguably the best one with the most questionable art is Toph, Hard-Headed Teacher. You discard a card when it enters, and if you do, return an instant or sorcery from your graveyard to your hand. Cool. Why does that matter? Because whenever you cast a spell, not just instants, not just sorceries, whenever you cast a spell, creatures 2, artifacts 2, you earthbend 1. You can suit up a land and make it the most obnoxious threat possible. Now, if you cast a lesson, you put an additional 1/1 counter on that land, but this is still an insane card. But again, questionable art. But also, it's a multicolor slop format that we're entering into, so yeah, let the slop away. But while we're also doing the multicolor slop thing, we're also doing some mid-range soup. So slop, soup, we're basically getting the full 4-course meal here, served up on a Universes Beyond platter, because, like I said, black decks are back, and people love their mid-range cards. Alright, Raven Eagle, the combination creature that just also happens to be an assassin, basically does what Graveyard Trespasser used to do. Exile a card from a graveyard. If it's a creature card, you make a clue. Whenever you draw your second card each turn, keep in mind this is each turn. You're not just limited to your turn, you can do this on your opponent's turn as well. That opponent loses a life and you gain a life. Now, given it's hard for a black deck to draw 2 on an opponent's turn, but if you're splashing some colors, this does really well. It's a worse Graveyard Trespasser, admittedly, but you can't argue with exiling stuff. And again, we've got the superior Spider-Man deck, Raven Eagles, gonna eat that up. But we've got Beifong's Bounty Hunters, alright? The men who were hunting down the blind bandit herself are now out here saying that whenever a non-land creature you control dies, you get to Earthbend X. Sacrifice decks have been a thing in Standard for a little bit. Maybe not great by any means, but they've been there. They're mostly black-white decks too. Why not just switch over to green? Oh no, you lose out on a different legend in black-white? Shucks. That's just so rough. But hey, we can play multiple of Beifong's Bounty Hunters. So whenever a creature dies, Earthbend X multiple times. I think that's a trade that we can take. And when we can ramp in green in a lot of different ways, it's kind of worth it. Day of Black Sun, we've already got 0 Point Ballad, which is nice, but you have to pay a lot of mana into it. Day of Black Sun says every single creature with mana value X or less loses all abilities until the end of the turn, and then you destroy them. There's a lot of creatures that have death triggers, not only in this set, but in a lot of the other sets in Standard, in Pioneer. Day of Black Sun just saying, no, you are all nothing. Everything about you ceases. It's pretty solid. I can see this as a good sideboard piece. I don't know if it's good enough to play in the main board of most decks, but it definitely has some utility. And just thinking about all the crazy things that could happen in Modern with this, sure, you've already got Wrath of the Skies, but what better way to take out some of these affinity decks and other things than to just remove that ability? A Johnny looks real foolish when you do this for X equals 2. Alright? Zuko Conflicted. We're all a little bit conflicted, because this card on its face looks kind of fire, but you gotta wait a turn for him to turn on. You lose 2 life, but as a black deck, draining yourself to gain some type of extra effect is pretty good. Draws a card, gets more powerful, makes a red, but at the end, he exiles and then returns under an opponent's control. That's a conflict of interest if we're saying anything. But who knows? Maybe there is a really good legend shell, or a really good rogue shell, or a really good just every outlaw type that we see with all of these that could be really interesting the more that we explore it. And that's a great curve of outlaws right there. But me likey bouncy. Me likey when old deck come back stronger than ever. Because by God, is this Pixie deck starting to pick up some more traction. Between Airbender Ascension and Northern Air Temple, we're starting to see that there is a lot of bounce synergy present here. Airbender Ascension says, airbend 1 target creature when it enters. Whenever a creature you control enters, put a quest counter on it. And whenever you get 4 or more quest counters, exile a target creature that you control and return it to the battlefield under its owner's control. Pixie. Bounce this. Play this. Cool. Now we're getting some more triggers. Sun Pearl Current, Bounce Pixie. Oh, more triggers. All right, guess we're going to go ahead and bounce this back. Oh, there's another one. And let's just go ahead and now we get to bounce this back and keep the value train moving. Now, most of the Pixie decks that we're seeing right now are likely going to be in this black and white shell. We could see a return to blue, but combine these things with something like Cosmogrand Zenith, and again, there's a lot of potential for some disgusting bounce synergies to go down. And the fact that we can play Duskrose Reliquary in this deck as well and just keep bouncing things over and over again, getting insane value, removing creatures, getting stuff with Cosmogrand. There's a reason why me likey bouncy. Bounce is going to be peak in just a couple of weeks. But while bouncing is going to be peak, let's talk about how green is going to be mean. We have a return of rampant growth with the lesson mechanic on it. All right, we're going to be able to play this thing in a sideboard once we get some of the learned stuff out of Strixhaven. But in the meantime, we're ramping. There hasn't been a good ramp deck in Standard in a minute, unless we're thinking about the various Overlord decks that are trying to get the Everywhere tokens. But I think now, with Shared Roots, with Elemental Teachings, with Badgermole Cub, and all of the other Earthbending shenanigans, green has a lot of huge potential for ramping. Now, there used to be a couple of Hour of Promise decks that were running around Pioneer. I think Elemental Teachings is definitely going to replace some of them. Yeah, you have to pick lands with different names, but the reality is, Hour of Promise just said, okay, get deserts. Now we can play a lot of different cards, and let's be, again, so very real here. There's a Titan deck in Pioneer. The Titan deck will likely want this. We need it. Badgermole Cub has a couple of really interesting lines in Standard where we can basically pump up all of our little creatures. But seeing this in potentially the Simic deck, Earthbending, a couple of things with a Jackal on the battlefield, is going to be huge. Because Jackal into this, Earthbending a couple things, does allow us to basically go crazy and play an Ouroboros really early. This is an insane card with a lot of value. And a lot of people were kind of high on it earlier on when it was being first spoiled. But I think this is a really interesting design space that's going to let a lot of aggressive green decks really shine. But if I had one wish outside of you subscribing to the channel, it would be just any of these cards here seeing play. But Tron is bad, so Planetarium of Wan Chi Tong is not going to be great. As much as I loved the bloodbending episode of Avatar, you're never going to realistically waterbend 10 outside of any format that's not Commander. So, ooh, you get to control your opponent during their next combat phase. Big whoop. Alright? Fake Emrakul shenanigans aside, Foggy Swamp Visions as a certified Ocelot Pride lover. I would love to see a black-white cat deck come into existence and let us play this somewhere in the deck so that we can exile our opponent's stuff and then make token copies of it. Ocelot Pride exiling copies of Ocelot Pride and making more copies of it with the Pride trigger is a chef's kiss. But I don't think the kiss is going to get any better than this. Sokka had his vision of his love in the mist, and this is only because I have my wish that I could get to play this. But that's everything. Let me know what you guys thought about this. Did I miss any cards that you thought might show up here? Have they shown up in other people's lists? Or maybe I'm just overlooking what could be showing up in Modern. Admittedly, I don't think there's a lot that's going to be too impactful out of this set. But maybe I'm missing something. So let me know in the comments down below. Let me know what decks you're thinking about playing in Standard, because that's going to be the next couple of videos that we see on the channel after this. And I'll see you guys in the next one. Peace.